afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start today with your hosts, Jermaine Reed and Sean Roby, and our friend, the blacksmith, is in the studio today, Dr. Ramel Smith, and on the phone line, none other than pastor from All People's Church, Pastor Steve Jerby. Good afternoon, Pastor Jerby.
Good afternoon. It's good to hear from you.
Hey, good to hear from you too, man. It's been a while since I've seen you, but was glad that you're able to make some time in your schedule today to join this very important conversation. And I believe you know Dr. Ramel Smith.
I do know him very well through our partnership and connection with Omega Psi Phi fraternity.
I was just telling them what great work that you do on Second and Center just throughout the years, but from the summer programs that you do, and it's just an honor for us to be able to team up with you during the summer to do the Louis Adams educational backpack educational fair, and the help that we receive from the church, CYD, just the block in itself, I think is just a testimony of love, and when you really had a collaboration of all people coming together, what great things can be done for the community.
Well, you know what? I got a couple of announcements we're going to make before we jump into this very important topic today. On this day in Black history, February 17th, 1938, Mary Frances Berry was born. In 1976, she became the first woman to serve as chancellor of a major research university. In 1977, she became the first African-American woman to serve as United States Chief Educational Officer. That was Mary Frances Berry. We have a recruitment session coming up tomorrow for Fresh Start Family Services at 6 o'clock p.m., February 18th at 6 o'clock p.m. It's a 1-hour recruitment informational fair at Fresh Start, 1720 West Florist Avenue. If you would like to register in advance for that, you can call 414-351-1100, extension 150. 414-351-1100, extension 150. And also, the Color Child Welfare Conference is coming up May the 17th, actually in like 3 months. So it's going to be really great. We have a number of individuals who were formerly in foster care who will be presenting at this conference, from doctors, judges, nurses, politicians, educators, authors, just a number of people who have beat the odds. And hopefully they'll be able to share some information with us on what we can do to help motivate children who are in the system care to exceed or to excel in life. So if you would like to register or learn more about the Color Child Welfare Conference, you can call 414-229-4895, 414-229-4895, or go to hbsswceh.uwm.edu. So again, hope you can register for that conference. And today, we are talking about celebrating the interracial alliances in the fight for equality for blacks, and particularly want to highlight the role of individuals who per se were not African American but played an instrumental part in supporting the efforts to help us move further along this journey here in America and even in other parts of the world. And so it's going to be a very exciting conversation. We have, as I stated on the phone, Pastor Steve Jerby from All People's Church, and we have Dr. Ramel Smith in the studio with us. And so hopefully in this session today, we will be able to kind of look at the legacies of some black and white people that have helped black people achieve a better quality of life in America, explore dynamics of interracial relationships in general, but particularly in child welfare, explain the history behind the freedom schools, discuss importance of engaging young people in the political process, and lastly, we want to discuss how the achievement gap in Wisconsin impacts poor children, but particularly underprivileged children who are in the foster care system. So good afternoon, gentlemen, and if the community would like to join this conversation, they can call 414-444-5250. 414-444-5250. Now, all across the country, this is Black History Month, and we want to take this Black History moment to just really not just highlight what many of our ancestors and descendants have done to help us, but we also like to pause for a minute to thank those who were not African or Jamaican or black or colored, who have joined this humanity cause to really support us and to align with our missions and really bring about some positive change in our life. So I want to, highlight the Father James Groppe, from the 1960s, who was a dominant force in Milwaukee civil rights, chapter. Then you also have, who else? There was the Joshua Herschel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel, who walked with Dr. King. And then you had, remember, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, who were two Jewish New Yorkers that were murdered along with James Chaney by the KKK in June of 1964. So when we look at this, we really want to celebrate those individuals. But I often think about, General Harriet Tubman and the very important work that she did. But Harriet Tubman also needed some support from across the aisle.
No doubt about the Underground Railroad.
The conductor, yeah, and folks who finance,
financed it, had the hidden houses, that help as it relates to transporting, putting their lives at risk. And the one thing that I think is really like Jermaine to that is, no pun intended, is this: some of the white people were slave owners, former slave owners, and they realized some of the errors of their ways, and they tried to reconcile in a different way. Now, there's sometimes some things you can't say I'm sorry for, let's be real. But the one thing you can do, if you have made, an error, you can try to make amends in some better way. And so when we think of some of our religious groups specifically, the Mormons was a big group that had once sold slaves, but then became a big help on the Underground Railroad. So when we talk about some of our brothers to the north in Canada, allowing that to be a freedom land, so to speak, there's numerous amounts of people. And the one thing about history is sometimes, we'll remember some of the sexy names. Black History Month, we remember like Martin Luther King, Malcolm
Rosa
X,
Parks.
Harriet Tubman. We have those, but there's so many unidentified soldiers who gave up their time, their talent, their resources in so many different ways,
That's
and not
right.
only of African descent, but many other flavors from that standpoint, from a racial ethnic standpoint.
And while we know that discrimination and racism still exist and impact the lives of black folks here in America, there's still a number of what I call white unsung heroes.
No doubt.
That risk their jobs and social status on a daily basis to advance the cause of black folks in America, to support us. So, again, I want to say thank you to those individuals.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say one name that I don't know if we really talk about is a man named Peter Norman. And this is the crazy thing was he wasn't even from America. He was from Australia. And most people won't understand who Peter Norman is, but if I say Tommy Smith and John Carlos, they start to understand, that's 1968 Olympics Black Power poster that's in everybody's room that we share and hold up so proudly. But Peter Norman was an Australian who participated in the protest. And even though he wasn't from America, it was about a human rights issue, because in Australia they were very racial, they were very stereotypical, they were very prejudiced towards the Aborigines, the indigenous people to that land, very similar to here. So he understood injustices of people and working with it. And I say his name to say this: people think it was two people on the stand that it made a protest, but it was all three, because not only did Tommy and John wear the gloves, but all three wore a button that talked about human equality for all. And then on top of that, Tommy and John was sent home. We know that, and a lot of the ramifications they had. But Peter suffered a lot of the same ramifications, never able to run in another Olympics again, a lot of financial devastation, embarrassment towards his family, things of that nature. And he didn't know them, but when he found out what they was doing, he said, I want to be a part of this in some small way. So it's sometimes those small type of things that we don't even think about, that where we say, you know what, maybe I can't understand what you're saying, I can't feel your pain in every way, but let me show you in some sort of solidarity that had life-lasting ramifications, that I'm with you and I believe in this cause.
All right.
And one of the things I love about that story, as I've heard it told, is that Peter entered into a conversation with them about, does it help if I raise my fist in protest alongside you, or do I not? And for him to step aside and allow them to lead the action, decide the action, but to be in conversation about what is the best way to support what's going on. And I think, when white folks are engaged in issues of racial justice, that's the biggest thing we need to do, is not assume that we are leading the movement, but to really seek the words and wisdom from the leaders that are already there.
Well, Pastor Jerry, let me ask you this question. That's a really good lead into what I need to ask here. First of all, explain or share with this audience some of the initiatives or projects that you all work on over there at All People's Church.
So All People's, we've been in the Harambe neighborhood between Clark and Center Street on 2nd for 25 years, and a congregation really rooted and connected in the neighborhood. We've been doing urban ag from the beginning. In fact, in the early days of Growing Power, back when it was Will's Roadside Stand, it was children that had worked in our community garden that then got hired on to work at Will's farm.
Okay.
And so youth empowerment, youth engagement has always been huge. And so that includes our garden work program. In the summer, we also do Freedom School and an opportunity for 6 weeks to engage in not only the history of civil rights, but ways to be involved in movements for justice today. We also stand very closely with the Hamilton family. Coalition for Justice does a lot of their organizing meetings at All People's, either at the Harambe campus or our new site on 40th and Florist. And that alliance with the Black Lives Matter movement is because Derek Williams was killed blocks from our church. That was in our backyard.
Okay.
The illegal strip searches and body cavity searches that the Milwaukee Police Department was doing, most of that came out of the 5th District. That's our backyard. And so these are the issues of our community, of our congregation, and so we never seek out a cause or a crusade. We respond to what's going on in Milwaukee.
You know, I was watching an interview with Father Grappi, and Father Grappi is talking about leading a congregation or parish in the Central City. It was called the Core at that time. And what he said was, like you know, he didn't just seek out issues, but he had folks who were part of his congregation who were confronted with issues, and if they came to him, he felt that it was his duty, his responsibility to support and to advocate and fight for their causes. Do you agree, or do you have a connection there with what he's...
Absolutely. I mean, if you ever come to my office, I've got 2 large prints of Father Grappi that surround my desk to remind me of the work that he did, and really as a visual reminder of, I was called to serve in Milwaukee, and so I need to respond to the voices that are coming from Milwaukee. And it does mean that, it's not a single issue, because a living wage impacts our community. Police community relations impacts this neighborhood. Education impacts this city.
Okay.
So all of those things are the day-to-day realities of really everybody in Milwaukee, but in a particular way for African Americans and for residents in Harambe.
Well, now I'm thinking about Father Grappi, and he had challenges with the city of Milwaukee's government, particularly the leadership during that time, 60s, 70s, 80s. And there was Mayor Meyer and Chief Breyer. And the issues that they were dealing with during that time related to housing, education, youth employment, and police brutality. To be honest, these appear to be some of the same core issues that are facing black families who are living in a quote-unquote core or central city. While we have won some victories, that's evident, why do you think that 50 years later, 40, 50 years later, we are basically fighting the same fight?
Well, I think from a social perspective, it's white supremacy. And there are powers that are in place that try to isolate, protect, and anytime we look at the challenges that tear down a community, we need to ask the question, who's getting rich because of this? Who's able to advance their personal standing at the expense of others? And what kind of systems are in place? Power protects power. And so, we see all of that. As a religious leader, that white supremacy is demonic.
Okay.
And so it doesn't just operate on, the actions of a police chief or a mayor. It's bigger than any individual. It's the whole system of government. It's the system of justice. It's the system of education, where, even when folks want to do right, they are caught up in patterns that are much bigger than themselves.
No, I was just thinking about what you said, and I think you hit it on the head as far as why things haven't changed from a social standpoint, and it's all economic. When you said white supremacy, I kind of shudder at that term, and the reason why I say it is this. I was talking with student minister William Muhammad, and we were talking. He was talking about like in the early '60s when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would talk about the white devil, and he said the reason why they don't use that term nowadays. He said they had to use it in that time as a shock because black people had an inferior complex, and the white people had walked around with this superior type of attitude, and so it was a shock. And I think when we hear that term "white devils," we would apply it to all white people, and that's what would cause relations with people who we probably should not have had problems with. So I pause to say I don't think it's white supremacy. I think it's always that elite sect of people. Now they happen to be white, but it doesn't pertain to all white people. And I say this very carefully because real leadership is invisible. So if we think that our senators and our congressmen and even our president is the leaders, then we're mistaking ourselves, because without the lobbyists, without the big payroll funders, none of those people are in those positions. So true leadership is invisible. Now, that is that WASP group. But what I think they have done, and one of the ways that I think we always talk about Willie Lynch, and I say one of the ways that Willie Lynch has fooled us, or that theory is that is, divide the blacks, the young and the old, the men and the women, all of those different changes. But really what leaders have done, this preceded Willie Lynch, who was not the most intelligent man in the world. This is what all leaders have done. They know you divide and you conquer. So what white supremacists have done, and you can look at it today in the Tea Party, they've convinced some white people that they're better just because they're white, even though they still are, marginalized and oppressed in the same way, just because they believe in that hope that because of their skin color, somehow that they're better. That's what allows for the oppression. That's what does not allow for all of the races, and not so much the races, but those who are oppressed, those who are marginalized, to come together and to connect and really band against the true enemy that be. And those are the plutocrats, the oligarchs. We say it all the time, 20% of America owns 91% of the wealth. Well, if we get that, that lower that lower 80%, together, and all of us were to collectively come together, there's so many different changes that could be made. But because the upper echelon has been so brilliantly brutal in their social engineering, they've kept people apart that really need to help each other. So like I said, when I say white supremacy, it's not all white people, and that goes back to our whole thing. It's those people who act evil that are the real enemy.
Well, you know what? Let me say, because
the demonic spirit.
I like what both of you are saying, and I really want to kind of tie this into child welfare. And I heard Pastor Jerby talk about power protects power, and that there is, from his point of view, white supremacy that operate in government systems. And somehow, some way, I think folks are nervous to talk about white supremacy, racism, discrimination, and classism and power that actually permeate the child welfare system in America, but not just in America, but in my belief, right here in Wisconsin. So when we look at our local foster care community that is comprised of 68.2% African Americans as of November 2015. That was some data I just got the other day. And we look at that the majority of folks who are serving these children, these families, are non-African American. And we talk about power protects power. There is a philosophy, there is a culture that exists in child welfare, in government systems. Is it one that liberates or oppresses people? You know, and where does that come from? Because, again, we have a lot of kind-hearted, good, righteous Caucasians who work in the foster care system, who work with these families. Mm-hmm. But there is a culture that exists that, in my opinion, oppresses black folks, whether they're contracting, whether they are service providers, whether they're foster parents, whether they are clients themselves. So let's deal with that issue and that culture of white supremacy and or what you I think you.
Well, no. I think that's what permeates it. When you talk about permeate the system, you get people to think that race is a real issue, and then you get true racism. So racism is real, and you get it from that. It's just sometimes the people who are oppressing you are your fellow, people who are being continually oppressed at the same time. They just don't understand they're working for a hierarchy that doesn't care for them.
A hierarchy. Yeah. So, Pastor George, when you talk about, and I'm sure in your congregation and in your community that your church is located in, the community in which your church is located in, there's a number of families who are impacted by child welfare services, meaning foster care.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because we are a really diverse congregation, we've got families that are caught up in the system, children that have been removed from parents. We've also got kinship care, and we've got adults that have brought in children through the system, either as guardians, foster care towards adoption. And so we live with the reality of all sides of this issue, and there's not a simple answer, but I think one of the root problems with the foster care system is that there's not enough support going into the situations.
Preserving the families, preventive.
Exactly. There's not preventative care. There's not, social workers are overtaxed with massive caseloads, yeah. So they can't do any personal interaction. And we do have, this system that divides families, and, it could be situations where absolutely children need to be removed. But there are also situations where, it's not an issue of a good parent or whether a parent loves a child, but, does the parent have the resources to support a family?
Right.
And
to that point, I know we got to take a break just real quick. I think one of the bigger issues is what kind of country do we live in that allow these situations to exist that causes the families to be in such peril? You talk about being very reactive. There's so many things we could do much more from a proactive nature, but I'll talk about that on the other side.
Okay, we're going to take a break. You're listening to Fresh Start today, and we're talking about celebrating the interracial alliances in the fight for equality for African Americans in this country. So we'll be right back after this break, and we'll see you then.
Do you know what Nelson Mandela, Andrew Jackson, Malcolm X, and Steve Jobs have in common? Each of these individuals were world leaders who were once in foster care. We often hear about the road from foster care to prison, but did you know there's another road from foster care to a world stage? Fresh Start Family Services is looking for adults to become licensed foster parents. Every child needs a caring adult in their lives. Wouldn't it be great if you could foster or adopt the next world leader? For more information on how you can become licensed with Fresh Start, please call 414-351-1100. That is 351-1100.
Good afternoon. You're back on Fresh Start today with your host, Jermaine Reed and Sean Roby. Our in-studio guest is Dr. Ramel Smith, and on the line we have Pastor Steve Jerby. You all have to forgive me about that fade out right before the commercial because I was faded out. I was somewhere else, but I'm back. I've never been to broadcasting school, but we're going to continue this dialogue, this conversation. If you want to join, please call 414 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. Pastor Jerby, there is an initiative in the Chicago area called One Church, One Child to address particularly African-American children who are in waiting for adoption or for foster care services, and that has been a pretty successful initiative. What do you think needs to happen here locally to get the faith-based community more engaged, involved in this social justice issue of foster care and adoption?
Well, I think one of the things is we need particularly Central City congregations, congregations of color, to promote and encourage black adoption, because one of the challenges around placing African Americans in white homes is that it removes the cultural context for those students, for those children.
Yes.
And so the churches, we all celebrate family, we all have family programming, but how are we engaging in the conversation about these children who are being removed from families, and what does their sense of family mean? And when congregations can be an expression of an extended family, when we can look at one another and actually call each other brother and sister, then we got to invest in every single individual in whatever their family circumstance is.
You know, and I think to add to that, Pastor Jerby, when you look at that model in Chicago, even if you do not foster a child or adopt a child legally, you can take families under your wing, because we have more than enough churches who can reach out and do some
Preventive work.
Not just on Sundays. And get out in the community and let people know that, hey, these doors are open for you and your family.
And I would strongly encourage that we not promote so much adoption, because I think we're on this termination of parental rights, wave, and we promote that, and we don't really understand the trauma that we can cause to children, long-term trauma to families, severing ties and cultural connections and what have you. And why that's really important, because the Federal Adoption Incentive Grant Program states provides the provisions for states to receive adoption incentive endowments based on the difference between the number of adoptions it actually finalizes and a base rate. The base rate quantifies how many adoptions would have been finalized had the state made no improvement based on figures from recent years. States have a target number of adoptions from the foster care system they must exceed each year in order to receive a bonus. And so right now, states receive awards for youth in several categories. One is being $4,000 is awarded for improvement on overall guardianship placement, $5,000 awards for improvement on adoption, overall adoption, $7,500 awards for improvement on guardianship and adoption of children between the ages of 9 and 14. Then there's a $10,000 award for improvement on guardianship and adoption of children under 14. So when we look at this, we have to really be careful that we don't have this contest that goes on how many kids we can get adopted so that the state can get a bonus. So,
I'm laughing, but it's not funny. I used to sell cars, and if you're buying a car, you can take this for two ways. The car dealership has relationships with banks, so if they get so many cars sold to a specific bank, they get a bonus. So it might be another bank that has a better option for you as far as an interest rate, but they're going to go with the people where if they go here, you're going to get that. They're going to get that extra bump and kickback. Not thinking about that. So seeing that, we talk about like commodities again. We go back to the middle passage
children.
and
we're selling
like
children.
That. Yeah,
in some child welfare systems across America, there's a spirit of selling children like you're selling cars. There's something inhumane about that.
Because now our incentive is not really placing the child in the best placement, but it's about us receiving
how do we benefit
for what we've done, and then to be able to receive the financial incentive for it, as you said.
And I'm not saying that is something that applies in every case, but overall, there's this spirit and attitude of let's terminate parental rights and then now qualify this child to be adopted. And the more adoptions we can secure by November, then we'll have this big adoption celebration and we'll get Forever Family T-shirts and the state gets paid. So I just wanted, just when you had said that, Pastor Jerby, I just wanted to kind of shed some light on what happens there with adoptions. And I just think that if we do like what you said and add some more money on the front end to support families, we can absolutely keep children safely in their families of origin.
And if we're engaging with parents,
Right.
From the moment of pregnancy on up, then, faith communities can be aware of these problems before they become a crisis situation, or before a social worker ever enters in. If parents need help, then the church communities need to respond to the parents and give them that support.
Absolutely, and maybe in some instances well before that pregnancy, because sometimes it's a matter of you may not need money, but you may just need resources, someone to guide you in a particular direction, and you can do the work yourself.
Now, let me say this, Pastor Jerby, because I would like to commend All People's Church on something that you all are doing, this initiative, this project, which has a big historical meaning and value to it, the Freedom Schools. Can you talk about the Freedom School? Because I was not even aware before I ran into you about a year ago that you all even had the Freedom School.
Yeah, so Freedom School is, of course, born out of the civil rights movement. Mississippi had one of the most famous statewide efforts that as students walked out of schools to protest desegregation, they didn't walk out and then give up on education. Instead, the community surrounded them and said, we're going to give you your curriculum. We're going to make sure that you're learning the academic basics, but we're also going to give you a cultural foundation and a political engagement education. And so these freedom schools responded. Milwaukee had freedom schools in 64 and 65. Lloyd Barbie and Vel Phillips were very instrumental in making that happen. And so the legacy that All Peoples has picked up is a long tradition of saying, okay, what are we going to do to give the students an academic background, but also this cultural background and this political engagement? And so we've been doing this program for about 7 years now, and we continue. We're making plans for this summer. Enrollment papers are going to be rolling out in the next couple of weeks, and it's a way to give kids a different way of learning.
Can I say one thing? Because I've gotten a chance to participate in the Freedom Schools as a guest lecturer, reader to the children. I say that hoping some other people will hear this and volunteer this summer. One of the favorite things I got a chance to do was to talk to them, explain to them about what I did for a living, but then to read a book with them that had a significant, what I thought meaning, to have some type of significant meaning for them, long lasting. And I say that because we talk about sometimes putting pressure on the church. The church needs to come in, but it has to be a full community effort. We can't put everything on the church. Other community activists have to come in different ways. And what you had said, Brother Sean, was so true. Maybe we don't adopt or we don't foster, but coming in and talking with the young person, maybe establishing a relationship. Maybe it's not a true mentorship, but something where you have an on and on contact, or maybe it's just that one time that you did something to spark with that young child. But I know that's one of the things that they also do. So those people, I don't know, Pastor Jerby, how you recruit all of your people, but I think Jermaine and Sean and Tone and Keon would be some good examples of people to come in and to talk about what they do and read to the kids.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so, Pastor Jerby, you're saying that the enrollment information is about to go out. So what are some of the qualifications? What do people need to do to apply and to qualify to be a part of this program?
So the program is open to those who have completed kindergarten all the way up through high school. The high school leaders are actually given a small stipend because they'll have their own classroom time, but they'll also be servant leaders working with the younger students so that we can build in opportunities for them to be role models. And even though there's academic components to it, this is far more built around engaging in our story. This year, the curriculum is focusing on the principles of Kwanzaa and making sure that every student walks through knowing the Nguzu Saba and what that actually means in their household, on their block, and in Milwaukee, and really with the power and strength to transform the world, that we don't have to wait for somebody else to lead the way. You know, the civil rights had children deeply engaged in the movement, and the work for justice today isn't just for grown folk. We need the voices of youth at the forefront.
And that's really important because with the Children's Crusade, when you go back and you tie it to the civil rights movement, I mean, the Children's Crusade really reignited, the force and propelled the movement forward. So, engaging young people in the political process in social justice is really critical to our survival and advancement. And with that being said, because I want to go back to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC, SNCC, and John Lewis. He was the leader of that organization, and the Congress of Racial Equity. I mean, it was James Farmer was over core. But back in '64, they had decided to recruit several hundred Northern college students, and many of them came from Wisconsin. James Swerg was one of those individuals who was on the bus going into Alabama, who was the first one to get off the bus and was beaten by a mob of white folks. But these good-hearted, righteous white folk who came down and worked in the South to help register folks to vote. And now that we're on the heels of the primary election, I guess my question for you two is, for Pastor Jerby and for Dr. Smith, is when we look at history that surround black folks voting, black folks engaging in the political process, how do we deal with voter apathy in the black community, and how important is it for us to engage so that we're a model to our children?
Well, I'll start with it. I think the first thing what we have to think about is why are we voting? And we had talked about this with Tosha and our brother Biko Baker the other day. But the main thing with voting is, well, who am I voting for? And we had talked off air a little bit. When you see cities that were revitalized by voting, specifically from the African-American population, we go back to Chicago and Harold Washington, and we look at how beloved he was in that city, but the turnout he got. We look at a young Marion Barry, and how he's still the mayor of life in Washington, D.C. after everything. But what it was, a young Marion Barry, Harold Washington, these guys galvanized the people. They galvanized the spirit. You had Andrew Douglas down in L. Douglas Wilder in Virginia, Andrew Douglas in Atlanta as the mayor. When I think you have people that the people believe in, you get a galvanized spirit, and the people want to go and vote. I think one thing what we have to do is make our candidates attractive, where they believe if this person is in, something is going to happen. And I think that's one of the things that creates a lot of the apathy within our community. We believe that no matter what we do, the situation is going to remain the same.
Yeah, Angela Walker, who's an activist, been throughout Milwaukee. She's actually a candidate for the Socialist Party, running as the vice presidential candidate. One of the things that Angela has said is, when you're going to dismantle the master's house on the plantation, you use every tool available. And the reason that she says that is voting is not going to bring about every change that we want to see in our city or in our country. But it is a tool to bring about change. And we don't want to leave any resource unused. And there are folks who fought and died for the right to vote. Right. And so for folks to sit home and opt out is to give up a portion of the power that we have. And we also have to look at how accountable our candidates. And the amazing thing is that at a local level, you have FaceTime with the candidates. Right. When you look at all the aldermanic races, there were some great leaders that stepped forward, some that won, some that didn't win, but you can touch them. You can reach out and see them. You can break bread with them, and that means that they can hear your voice in a way that statewide and national politics, you don't have that same connection.
when I think, and I want to go back to something, I appreciate that, Pastor Jerby. You know, early in the interview, we were talking about some of the challenges that Father Grappi had with the city of Milwaukee's leadership, particularly Mayor Meyer and Breyer. And we talked about some of those overarching issues like housing, education, youth employment, and police brutality. I want to kind of talk about education for a minute, because when we talk about politicians and folks who pass legislation, draft bills, you know, hopefully they are listening to their constituents and are drafting bills and passing bills that's going to empower or uplift those folks in our community. So as it relates to education, you know, that's still a hot topic today. And when I was looking at the NPR, National Public Radio, a report from UCLA finds that K through 12 schools in Wisconsin suspend black high school students at a higher rate than anywhere else in the country, and has the second highest disparity in suspension rates between white and black students. Milwaukee, the state's biggest city, suspends black high school students at a rate nearly double the national average. In addition, the state also has the largest achievement gap between black and white students in this country, and ranks last in reading comprehension tests among black fourth graders. Milwaukee has the most black students in the state and is the biggest contributor to the achievement gap. So from the faith-based community, from the mental health community, from the child welfare community, what must we do, especially to help foster children who, of all poor children, to me are the most vulnerable, because many of them are functioning 2 and 3 grade levels below their grade placement. And there's that social promotion piece. So how do we really advocate and get our politicians on board to understand that we really need them to advocate and speak up for children in Milwaukee, particularly black children who are doing the worst?
I always said that there's no person that holds a school to greater responsibility than the parents.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So when we look at like our so-called magnet schools in the city, these schools are no different than other schools. But what it is they have parents that believe that school is better. And because the parents believe that school is better, the teachers believe they're better, they hold the kids to higher standards, and they start to really have them to work on the level in which they are capable of working on. However, when you have families, and we talked about, you know, from our troubling system, from a social standpoint, when you have parents who cannot be as involved with their children's life, how much less are they going to be involved in their lives at school? And so then you have what we call in Milwaukee throwaway schools, which should be a word that should never even have been invented. It's an oxymoron in my standpoint. But as we talk about that, first we had to get the spirits of the parents collected together.
Right.
And then once you have the parents together, you get to community. It's what we call like a collective impact. You have 5 different entities. You have the school, you have the home, you have the community, you have the government, and the fifth is the child itself. Because if you have everything working but the child is not invested, it's a lot of work that's going to go to waste, because the child has to have accountability. But that goes back into us preaching self-love, self-respect, self-accountability, and self-acceptance to the child to understand that this is what you're worthy of. Back in the day, and this kind of goes, I think, to our voting situation, why some people don't vote, because we can. Now, you tell us we can't vote, then we get upset, we get frustrated. But once you get a little comfortable, you get a little complacent. It's
We
not
can
there.
sit on the back. We
When
can
they
sit
when
on
they
the
told
front of
us
the
we
bus.
couldn't read,
Yeah.
you know, we were risking, you know, getting whipped to
Wow.
learn how to read. But now that everything is free, everything is
gotta
there.
relax, we're comfortable.
It's not, you know, it's not somebody saying you can't have it, and we have to take better responsibility ourselves.
Pastor George, do you have a response there?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, you know, if education needs parental involvement, and we also have to look at the teachers are being set up to fail. When we see the kind of education cuts that have happened at a statewide level, that's born on the backs of black and brown students, and so you have more experienced urban teachers that are retiring. So you've got teachers that aren't as equipped or seasoned in these classrooms, and the classroom sizes are enormous. And then you have this mindset that plays into the classroom to prison pipeline. And
Okay.
so what do you do with not just one student who's unruly, but you look out at a sea of students, and you don't know how to handle it, and you don't have the resources to handle it. So let's remove them. Let's put them in a different place. Let's lock them up and let somebody else deal with them and forget about the consequences. I think all of that comes into play. And this is one of those concrete ways where electoral politics matter, because if the county executive gets to determine what Milwaukee Public Schools looks like, then all of a sudden it's the surrounding communities that vote in the county exec.
Okay.
Their voices are dictating what's happening in our schools. And how is that in our best interest? You know, there's a reason we elect our school board locally.
Now, you know what? Thanks a lot, Pastor Jerby. I know we're about to close this segment. It's been really great talking with you and Dr. Smith, but there's one piece that I really want to touch on. When we talked earlier, you talked about white supremacy and some of the power structures. Power protects power was something you said earlier. Dr. Smith talked about this ideology of superiority. What I want to know, because whatever successes that we have achieved as a people is because we were able to create alliance with folks who didn't look like us, on some level, some degree. Harriet Tubman had her faithful supporters. Dr. King had his. The Big Six who organized the March on Washington, they had to expand to the Big Ten, which incorporated some Caucasians, so rabbis, priests, and so they can move that agenda forward and be more inclusive. So when I look at child welfare, which is predominantly Caucasian, I would dare to say that 80 to 85% of that workforce is Caucasian, and we know that almost 70% of the client base is African American. You incorporate Hispanics there, then you have 80%. Now, this is according to the Department of Children and Families data, most recent data. So my thing is, for black folks who have this deep distrust of government systems and white folks, how do we heal that relationship? Because right now we're going to have some black folks who are in the system that have to work with white people.
I mean, just to be real, I don't know how you heal that, to be honest with you. As an overall whole, whenever I think we work on an individual basis, something called xenophobia. It's called the fear of the unknown. So those things you fear, you run from, or you try to kill. It's a survival mechanism. As you start to interact with people one-on-one, then we start to see what really matters. And that's where if somebody truly is concerned about you, somebody really loves you, trying to help you, that's when race doesn't really matter, because you're looking at the overall thing. But we live in a broken system. And that's one of the reasons why the Black Panthers, they weren't just about trying to get freedom and equality. They were trying to overhaul the system. It was like capitalism is what destroys it. To every point that Pastor Jerby made, whether it's kids being in the pipeline for school, it all goes back to capitalism, prison industrial complex, what makes money. And those who are on top are always going to get those who have been marginalized and oppressed. So it's difficult. We don't want to say it like it's hopeless, but when we look at it, it's a difficult situation.
Pastor Jerby, do you have any recommendation on what can be done to encourage healing and building trust between black folks who are in the system and many of the Caucasian folks who are serving those families?
Well, I think if we look back at some of the white allies or white accomplices, one of the common threads is the faith component. So abolitionists, the Quakers, were deeply involved. You got Groppe, who's a Catholic priest. You got Rabbi Herschel. Faith is one of those defining pieces of us individually and collectively. And when faith communities can tear down the lines of division and create an opportunity for a common humanity, and I don't care if you got the same faith as me or not, it's a shared value that we have, right? So I appreciate my friends and brothers from the Nation of Islam, even though we don't have the same religion, but I know faith is important to them, and they respect the faith that I have. And so if we can connect with these deep commonalities and use that as a place of respect, it's not the only place where we can heal, but it's an important starting point.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Pastor Jerby, for spending this time on Fresh Start today with us. Hopefully, we can have you come back in the future. And we certainly want to get more information about what you're doing over there at All People's Church, so we can get you a number of folks to help volunteer and support that program, the Freedom Schools. All right.
Fantastic. Just check out our website, allpeoplesgathering.org, and you'll find lots of information.
Is there a phone number?
414-264-1616.
Say it again.
414-264-1616.
1616. All right. Thanks a lot, Pastor Jerby. You have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, again, Fresh Start Family Services is holding a recruitment session on February 18th, 2016 at 6 p.m. You can call 414-351-1100, extension 150, 414-351-1100, extension 150 if you're interested in learning more about foster care and would like to be a support to the many vulnerable children who are in the system and their families. Please give us a call at Fresh Start, 414-351-1100. It's been great again on Fresh Start today. Glad to have Dr. Smith in with us today, and Keon, the engineer, and Tony Cash and Sean Roby. And we also want to give a shout-out, who's that, to Marlon Brando and Donald Sutherland for the work they did around the civil rights movement, and to all those great, good-hearted Caucasian brothers and sisters who have helped us along this tedious path, this journey. We salute you all, and all the great social workers who work in child welfare, who are doing the right thing and advocating for children and families who don't necessarily look like them. Thank you. Be blessed, be warm, and be safe. We'll see you next week.